Hello and welcome to another video trying to get you the very top grades. I'm excited today because the story I'm going to show you is written by a viewer called Samantha Grace, and I'm going to put this in as the last story into the story guide that I've just finished it actually, so look out for that coming soon. And to start with, I want to teach you 5 things from Samantha's story. So Samantha was writing a story about a game which goes wrong. She describes, as you'll see in a minute, having a game at her cousin's house where they hide her in a kind of massive walk-in closet, but she is claustrophobic, so disaster happens. But let's have a look at the other kinds of questions you might get. Write about an experience, blah, blah, blah. Would that fit this title? Yes, it would. Write about a place which, blah, blah, blah. Would it fit that? Yes, it would. Write about a time when you were, it would fit that too. And write about a person who, well, here she could describe her younger self as another person. So you can see there is a way to plan the stories before you go into the exam. And I would have that as an exam tactic. You know, I'd write a positive story and a negative story, have them both written, polish them up, get them exactly as you want them. And then that's your revision for the story writing question, because one of those stories will 100% fit whatever the question is. You won't remember it word for word because that destroys your creativity, but you'll have a fantastic knowledge, an intimate knowledge of those 2 stories, and it will just flow in the exam. However, the other thing I'm going to teach you is that you can go into the exam not knowing what story you're going to write at all. You can just wing it. In fact, I made a video on how to wing it. It was called How to Write Entertaining Stories and Description. It is fun. It was released last week and has already had 632 views. And the reason I'm showing you this is Samantha watched this video before she wrote what she wrote. And I made it for people who just don't know what to write. And it's a technique which will help you write no matter what's going on in your head. You'll get over that block and just be able to write. So are you ready to see how she does it? Well, the first thing is just to write the first stuff that comes into your head. So she automatically thought of phobias, wrote it down as a 1-word sentence. We all have one. Revealed or concealed, it's always there. Like a parasitical burden, it's always there. A forfeit is a forfeit, and at the beginning of the game I had foolishly agreed to it. I was blinded by darkness. Now you can see how she's just layering idea on idea as it comes to her in the exam. She's not worrying about it. She's not crossing stuff out. She realised she's got to bring from phobias back to the game to be answering the question. My heart racing as fast as a cheetah, to quote a cliche. And look what she's done. She's realised, oh God, that's the first idea that's come into my head. It's not very original. Okay, I know. I'll say it's not very original. I have that as part of my story. In disturbing times, it's difficult to think creatively and even more so originally. Now that's a fantastic joke for the examiner because the examiner knows a disturbing time is doing the exam, but the disturbing time is also going to be locked in the closet, which we'll find out in a minute. So the character is going through a disturbing time. Here we find out why. Yet I waited, sat cross-legged in my cousin's walk-in wardrobe. Classy, bespoke, the best, it simply beats the rest. The jingle for the advert sang. Though annoying, it was extremely comforting to have at least one bright star of reality in this consuming, bleak night sky. She's automatically had this jingle in her head. She's maybe got the idea from my video and thought, well, how can I stick it in? Well, she just puts it in her character's head. Now she's picking up on another of the techniques that I teach, which is contrast. And so she's got the bright star of reality, a brilliant metaphor, in the bleak night sky. And you can see how she's just layering idea on idea as they come to her and putting these ideas in her character's head as her character's trapped in the closet. I gently caressed my teddy, soft and secure. I couldn't believe I was relying on this babyish object in all its inanimacy to stabilise my ever-increasing blood pressure. Such a childish championship. And that's when it happened. So she's got this great description of the character's thoughts and now thinking, right, I'm going to introduce an event here. I don't know what the event is, but I'm going to write this down and it will force me to introduce an event. It's the equivalent of having a man walk in with a gun will suddenly change your narrative. You need that sudden thing that's going to make you introduce an event. Imagine rapidly losing grip of the single thing that was solidating your sanity in a split second. Not only have you lost your pulse, but you also begin to distinguish the whitest silhouette in the darkest of places. See how she's using contrast again? Classy, bespoke, the best. It simply beats the rest. I was beyond inaudible. My face whitened and my limbs became numb. The silhouette had disappeared. So you can see how she's introducing ideas just as they come to her. Now you might be thinking this technique is a little bit risky, so let's quickly jump in to the mark scheme. Well, it certainly allowed her writing to become compelling. We're not yet convinced because you're going to make that judgment when you get to the ending of the story. But we're certainly gripped. And why? Well, it's because Samantha's playing with her register. The register is the choice of words you make. And you can see how she's really playing with these. I hope you've noticed the alliteration all over the place, the way she's reaching for good vocabulary to make it fit. And because it fits, it's convincing vocabulary and it's compelling. It is assuredly matched to purpose. We are in the middle of this game. We can certainly see it's going wrong through all the characters' thoughts. Can we see that it has an ambitious vocabulary? Well, we sure can, can't we? And it's full of linguistic devices. I've shown you a metaphor, I've shown you contrast. If you're paying attention, you'll see it's absolutely jam-packed with literary devices. In other words, because she's not having to think about the plot, she's able to load up all her attention on the quality of her sentences. And that's why she's easily able to get up into the top band. Well, you might think that this would lead to bad organisation because she hasn't planned where the story is going. But no, because my video taught an important technique, which was the circular narrative. So she knows that at the end of the story, she's going to come back to the beginning, and that will count as an inventive use of structural features. Another bonus, though, is that contrast is a literary linguistic technique, but contrast is also a structural technique. So she gets marked double for it here. Does it have a range of convincing and complex ideas? Well, certainly it does, because she hasn't planned it. She's allowed herself to have complex ideas by forcing herself to fit everything that comes into her mind during the exam. She's forced herself to put that into the story. Now, because she's changing topic all the time, because all these ideas aren't necessarily linked when they come to her, she has to paragraph them and find links. And that gives her this mark. She gets fluently linked paragraphs because she's having to start a new paragraph with a new idea and then think, right, how can I relate this to what I wrote before? And that will make the paragraph linked. So what I'm trying to show you here is she actually gets higher marks because she hasn't planned the story in advance. It is forcing her to have an interested structure, an interesting organisation, and it is forcing her to use all these different linguistic devices and play around with ambitious vocabulary. Now, I wouldn't recommend this going into the exam cold. You need to practice this at home, but it really does work. So let's get back to Samantha's story. You can see that Microsoft has said, oh, I don't recognize some of these words. Inanimacy. So an inanimate object is one that's not alive, and it is an actual word. I've looked it up. And similarly, solidating. I've never heard of this as a word at all, but it actually does exist. And I just want to show you, it's there, solidating, sanity, split second. She's really enjoying the alliteration as she writes. She has taken on my challenge of making the writing fun for herself, and as a result, it is. So let's rejoin her young narrator stuck in the closet. I remained quiet. Now, I assume my expression was almost identical to a deer in the headlights as the silhouette reappeared, but but now it was only inches away from my face. Quickly I drew my legs closer to my body and took a long glance at the silhouette. A white dress shirt, white suit trousers, the luxury type that Mum forces us to wear. I think it's just to state that A, this is no longer just a silhouette, but an intricate replica of something or someone's shadow, and B, it was the most disturbing thing I have ever cast my eyes on. Again, you can see interesting structural features. She suddenly introduced this list of 2 different possibilities. You can see that every time she has a new idea, she starts a new paragraph and she's trying to link them together. As if on cue, it put out a marvellous grin, the ear-to-ear type, fashioned by the Cheshire Cat from Alice in the Wonderland, though this is the torture of Danny in Dystopia. And you can see her playing with books that are in her mind. You know, she knows Alice in Wonderland, she knows the Cheshire Cat grins this way, and she knows the examiner will also know this character. And then she's invented this amusing story of her own. Danny is obviously the name of her character, and again you can see her really enjoying the alliteration, Cheshire Cat, Danny in Dystopia. Ignorance. It always helps black out my problems. Frantically I buried my head into my knees, praying and begging that it would block this nightmarish beast out. I chanted the jingle over and over until its assonance no longer made sense to my brain. Now remember, she just chucked that jingle in at the beginning because it just entered her brain in the exam, but knowing that she had to write it down meant that when she comes later in the story, she can easily refer back to it. And that is an interesting structural feature. So this is what I'm showing you again. If you rely on what's in your brain, you will be able to invent a structure. Now there is an important health warning, and that important health warning is this. You can't just chuck anything in if it contradicts something that went before. It has to link back. Okay, and that's why she's put the jingle in again. It's linking back. Ignorance could no longer rescue me. I was forced to face the fearsome feline in the room. Again, love the alliteration. She's really having fun with it, and it's forcing her to think of some excellent vocabulary. Fearsome feline. And it reminds us of that phrase, the elephant in the room. So it's also got some humour that this is a giant cat in the room. The thing that nobody dare mention because it is causing her greatest fear. Who did he think he was deceiving? You can dress in angelic white as you're obsessively sinning, but you'll remain a demonic monster that lurks in rich children's wardrobes. So you can see here she's really playing with the vocabulary. She's possibly gone a little bit too far with obsessively sinning, but we can see it as a way of building this contrast, the angelic white and the demonic monster. We can see she's trying something really sophisticated through this contrast, and it works brilliantly as a way of describing her fear. Danny, it called out. Every syllable was an alarm in my ear that my death was ever approaching. Truthfully, nothing from the beginning to the end of this game had been somewhat amusing. Terrifying, of course, but sitting in a wardrobe alone with a demon on a blood moon night just didn't echo amusing, child-friendly game to me. Again, you've got contrast that she's using so skillfully, and she's just playing with words here. She's really enjoying herself, and it then becomes a pleasure to read. So if we go back briefly to the examiner's mark scheme, we can see that the language, the register, is compelling, and it is assuredly matched to purpose, which is to get us involved in the story. We can see the ambitious vocabulary all over the place, and so different readers will say, well, actually, I think the vocabulary might be a bit over the top, so it's not totally convincing. Well, I'm not going to give it the very top mark. I'll give it 22 out of 24. And another reader will come along and say, no, this is an exam and she's only 16 years old. What can you expect from a 16-year-old in exam conditions? I'm going to give it 24. But my point is, although your teachers might disagree about which of these marks to give, they certainly can't disagree that it's hitting so many of these bullet points. And the one that totally stands out is this one. Because she's letting every idea come to her and forcing it to work in the story, she is inevitably varied, And she has to be inventive. In order to make it fit, it's got to be inventive. And that, of course, is a major bullet point in organisation. So automatically, by writing in this way, she forces herself to get into the upper level 4 band. Right, we're going to look at the ending of the story now, and this is the most difficult bit. This is the part that will make the examiner think, is it convincing or not? And if the ending doesn't fit, it's not convincing. Let's find out what Samantha does. "Danny," it called out again. But this time it was followed by many rays of light, and the face of my delinquent cousins. The light heightened the secret silent tears I wasn't aware I had cried. I do acknowledge that it was only 7 minutes in hell with my phobia, but I am submissive to it. Curiosity, urge to look back at what was the catalyst of my panic attack. Now that I was allied with the omnipresent light, I glanced back, proud and mighty as the lion in charge of its pride would stand, but instead this was an extra friendly stuffed cat dressed in a customizable catsuit. So here we've got that structural feature of contrast. The catsuit is compared to a lion, but also the catsuit is the thing that had the Cheshire Cat grin. So you can see how she's had to link back to that earlier idea. And obviously the final contrast is that it is nothing to fear whatsoever. It is a bizarre thing to have in the wardrobe, a stuffed cat dressed in a cat suit, but never mind, we just have to run with it. And then she introduces the circular sort of ending. Remember, she started with the word phobias, and so she's finished it there. Phobias, I despise them. These were not my most heroic tears. Oh, what a tragedy. So that's not a bad ending. You can see it structurally does what it's supposed to do, and it's quite amusing as well. But Samantha then thinks again and thinks, well, maybe I could craft a different ending. So this is what Samantha wrote as her alternative. Curiosity. Urged to look back at what was the catalyst of my panic, I glanced back. It stood proud and mighty, like the alpha in a pride of lions, but instead this was an extremely friendly stuffed cat, dressed as James Bond. So she's realised that having a cat dressed as a cat is a bit bizarre, but the James Bond idea fits with the white silhouette that she had earlier, with the posh clothes that it was wearing. So that did work. Now, when she introduced the James Bond idea, I thought, oh, is there a way that we could refer back to something that went on earlier with James Bond? So I introduced this idea of in cold fear because I wanted a punchline that had something with license to kill that James Bond has. So I called it license to chill, just to show you how you can play around with this structural feature. And then the second alternative I thought of was going back to her idea of the circular structure, phobias, and then license to thrill. And so this goes back to the idea of the game at the beginning. Was it a game that was thrilling? Did you come away with your fear having really enjoyed it, like going on a terrifying roller coaster ride? Or did you come away still absolutely full of fear based on your experience? So that was another alternative ending. Okay, well, I'm obviously really proud of Samantha's effort here. I'm proud because she's taken my teaching and run with it and produced something that's really quite cool. But I'm also really proud that she's got the courage to then email it in and offer it up to us, the viewers. So I'd be really impressed if you did the same. If you want me to have a look at one of your stories, a piece of your writing, because you've really tried something out that I've been teaching, please post it and I will try to reply to you for sure, but I may even turn it into a video. Okay, the other thing that I teach in all of my writing videos is to try to start each sentence with a different word, and you can see how Samantha has done this. Phobias, we, like, a, my, yet, though. Now, she's then going to start using some of the same words, but with a first-person narrator, it's really hard to avoid starting with the word I or with the word my, and so you're not going to start every single word with a different, every sentence with a different word, but that's your aim. Whenever you can, you will. I, such, imagine, not, classy, I, my, I, now, quickly, as. So you can see how she's trying to do this all the time. Now, something I haven't touched upon is the quality of punctuation that Samantha is using here. She is forcing herself to use different kinds of punctuation. So we have the semicolon, exclamation mark, semicolon, quotation mark, because she's got the jingle, the dash to add extra information, which she uses a lot, as you can see. Full stops obviously used correctly, another dash, an ellipsis. You can feel her trying to use punctuation in an interesting way. Now, some of you might think, oh, that's just a bit mechanical. Do I just do that at random? But no, when you add in these more complex bits of punctuation, it forces you to add in extra ideas to your story, and it forces you to be more varied and interesting. So actually just saying to yourself, look, I'm going to chuck in the punctuation no matter what, sounds weird, but it works to make your sentences and your story much more interesting. And the way you punctuate your sentences counts for a massive amount of marks. It counts for 16 out of your 40 marks. That is a huge chunk. And let's have a look at what you need to do. Sentence demarcation is consistently secure. So that means you always get your full stops and commas in the right place. If you make a mistake with commas, you're not going to get into the top band. You can just forget it. A wide range of punctuation is used. Well, there you go. She's done that straight off and with a high level of accuracy. Now, what's interesting is the band below, you've got the range of the punctuation and it isn't always used accurate. You still get a really high mark. So it's well worth experimenting with this punctuation now so that you can go in knowing that even if you make a mistake in the exam, you're still going to get a high mark. But if you make no mistakes, you're on for top marks. Now, if you're using that punctuation, as you saw with Samantha's, that forces you to have appropriate sentence forms for effect. You know, it forces you to write interesting sentences. And now we get to these bullet points, which are all about vocabulary. And because Samantha was trying to use interesting vocabulary all the time, she's always using standard English. And she's always having complex grammatical structures because she's using complicated punctuation, which then forces her to have the grammatical structures. You can see that she's got ambitious vocabulary again for this bullet point, and it is extensive, as you saw throughout the story. And I think it's worth making the point again, because she hasn't had to worry about the plot of the story, she's instead been able to go out and have fun with words and fun with punctuation, and therefore get the top mark in this band. And every English teacher in the country would give this 16 out of 16 because she doesn't have errors there. So let's imagine she ended up with an examiner who's just a completely horrible, strict kind of person who's looking at it and saying, well, I don't find it convincing all the way through at all, and it's not necessarily compelling in all bits, so I'm not going to put it in the upper band, I'll put it in the lower band. The lowest the examiner could put it is 19 marks out of 24. And I don't think they could. That would be the stingiest possible mark they could give. But then if you've got 16 out of 16 as well, that gives you 35 marks out of 40, which is a phenomenal achievement. So a massive thank you to Samantha Grace. If you would like me to look at your work, you know what to do. Post it below. Thank you very much for watching. Why not subscribe for more grade 9 videos?